The sun was setting behind the tall buildings, painting the sky orange and red. 12-year-old Tommy walked slowly through the empty streets, his worn-out shoes making soft sounds on the cold pavement. His stomach hurt from being empty for so long. 3 whole days had passed since he last had a real meal. Tommy pulled his thin jacket closer around his small body. The wind was getting colder, and he could see his breath in the air. He had been walking for hours, searching through trash, cans, and looking for any dropped coins on the ground. But today, just like yesterday and the day before, he found nothing. His family used to have a small farm outside the town. They grew vegetables and had a few chickens. Tommy remembered waking up to the sound of roosters and helping his father feed the animals before school. Those days felt like a distant dream now. The farm was gone, taken away because his family couldn't pay their debts. Everything changed when his father got sick and couldn't work for months. The medical bills piled up like snow in winter. Then came the bad harvest when the rains didn't come. One by one, they had to sell their animals to buy food and medicine. First the chickens, then the old cow, and finally even their farming tools. When the bankmen came to take their farm, Tommy's mother cried for days. His father tried to stay strong, but Tommy could see the sadness in his eyes. "Don't worry, son," his father had said, putting a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. "I'll go to the big city and find work. I'll send money back home and we'll get through this together." That was 6 weeks ago. Since then, not a single letter or coin had arrived from the city. Tommy's mother grew weaker each day. She tried to hide it, but Tommy could see how thin she was getting. The small amount of money they had saved was almost gone, spent on the cheapest food they could find. Now Tommy found himself in a part of town he had never seen before. The houses here were huge, with tall iron gates and beautiful gardens. Warm yellow light glowed from behind fancy curtains in every window. He could smell delicious food cooking somewhere nearby, making his empty stomach growl even louder. A well-dressed man walked past him, not even looking in Tommy's direction. The man's coat looked warm and expensive, and Tommy wondered what it would feel like to never worry about being cold or hungry. He had heard stories about people who lived in houses like these. They had so much food that they threw away what Tommy's family would consider a feast. Tommy stopped in front of one particularly large house. Through the window, he could see a family sitting around a dinner table. The mother was serving what looked like roasted chicken, and there were bowls full of vegetables and fresh bread. The children at the table were laughing at something their father had said. They looked so happy, so safe, so full. For a moment, Tommy felt angry. Why did some people have so much while others had nothing? Why did his family have to lose everything while others seemed to have more than they could ever need? But the anger quickly turned to sadness. He wasn't mad at these people specifically. They hadn't done anything wrong. Life was just unfair, sometimes. Tommy turned away from the window and continued walking. He knew he couldn't go home empty-handed again. His mother would ask if he had found any work or food, and he would have to see the disappointment in her eyes when he said no. She never blamed him, but Tommy blamed himself. He was the man of the house now, and he was failing. The street lamps began to flicker on as darkness settled over the neighborhood. Tommy knew he should head home soon, but he couldn't give up yet. Maybe if he looked a little longer, he might find something. Maybe someone would drop a coin, or maybe a kind person would offer him some work. He remembered last week when Mrs. Johnson from his old neighborhood had given him $1 for helping her carry groceries. It wasn't much, but it had bought them bread for 2 days. Tommy had felt so proud walking home with that bread under his arm. For those 2 days, he had felt like he was taking care of his family the way his father used to. But that dollar was long gone now, and Mrs. Johnson didn't have any more work for him. Most people in his neighborhood were struggling just like his family. They wanted to help, but they barely had enough for themselves. As Tommy walked deeper into the wealthy district, he noticed how quiet everything was. No children playing in the streets, no neighbors talking over fences. Everyone was inside their warm houses, probably finishing their dinners and getting ready to watch television or help their children with homework. Normal family things that Tommy missed so much. He thought about his father somewhere in the big city. Was he warm tonight? Did he have enough to eat? Tommy hoped his father had found work and was just waiting for the right time to send word. Maybe he was saving up money to surprise them. Maybe tomorrow would bring good news. The hope kept Tommy going, even when his legs felt tired and his stomach cramped with hunger. He had to keep believing that things would get better. He had to keep looking for opportunities, no matter how small. His mother needed him to be strong, and he wouldn't let her down. Tommy pulled his jacket tighter and kept walking through the streets where dreams lived behind golden windows, while his own dreams felt as distant as the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky above. Tommy had been walking for what felt like hours when he came to the biggest house he had ever seen. It stood at the end of the street like a castle from one of his old storybooks. The house was 3 stories tall with dark stone walls and tall windows that seemed to watch him as he approached. Even in the dim streetlight, Tommy could see how grand and expensive everything looked. This was the home of Mr. Blackwood, though Tommy didn't know the man's name. Everyone in town knew about the house, though. Children whispered stories about the mean old man who lived there, and adults spoke his name in hushed voices when they thought kids weren't listening. Some said he was the richest man in the whole county. Others said he was the cruelest. Tommy had heard his parents talking about Mr. Blackwood once, back when they still had the farm. His father's face had turned red with anger as he spoke about how the man treated poor families who owed him money. He takes everything, his father had said. Houses, farms, even family treasures that have been passed down for generations. And he doesn't care if families end up on the street. Now, standing in front of the massive house, Tommy could almost feel the power and wealth radiating from behind those dark walls. The front gate was made of black iron with sharp points at the top. The garden was perfectly maintained, with bushes, trimmed into neat shapes and a stone path that led to the front door. Everything looked cold and unwelcoming, as if the house itself was warning visitors to stay away. Tommy was about to walk past when he heard something that made him stop dead in his tracks. It was a sound he knew well from his days on the farm, the unmistakable whinny of a horse. But this wasn't the happy neighing of a horse in a pasture. This sound was filled with distress, like an animal in pain or fear. The sound came again, echoing from somewhere inside the huge house. Tommy frowned and tilted his head, listening carefully. He knew horses well. His family used to have an old mare named Buttercup who helped them plow the fields. Tommy had learned to understand the different sounds horses made. This one was definitely calling for help. But why would there be a horse inside a house? Even a house as big as this one? Tommy looked around, trying to understand what he was hearing. Behind the main house, he could see the shapes of several buildings in the darkness. Those had to be the stables, barns, and other buildings where a rich man would keep his animals and equipment. Everyone in town knew that Mr. Blackwood had some of the finest horses in the region. Tommy had seen them once at the county fair. Beautiful. Animals with shiny coats and strong muscles. Their stables were said to be better than most people's homes, with clean straw, fresh water, and the best food money could buy. So why was there a horse inside the main house, and why did it sound so upset? Tommy crept closer to the iron fence, being careful to stay in the shadows. The last thing he wanted was to be caught trespassing on such an important man's property. But his curiosity was stronger than his fear. The horse whinnied again, and, this time Tommy was sure, the sound was coming from inside the house, not from the stables in the back. As he listened more carefully, Tommy could hear other sounds too. The scraping of hooves against wood, like a horse trying to move around in a space too small for it. Sometimes there was a thudding sound, as if the animal was kicking against walls or a door. These weren't the sounds of a happy, well-cared-for horse. These were the sounds of an animal in distress. Tommy's heart began to race. Something was very wrong here. He thought about all the stories he had heard about Mr. Blackwood, about how he treated people who couldn't pay their debts. If he could be cruel to people, what might he do to animals? The wind picked up, rustling the perfectly trimmed bushes and making Tommy shiver. He pulled his thin jacket closer and tried to think. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe the sound was coming from somewhere else and the wind was just carrying it in a strange way. Maybe there was a perfectly good reason for a horse to be inside the house. But deep in his heart, Tommy knew something wasn't right. He had grown up around animals, and he could tell when one was suffering. The horse behind those stone walls was definitely not happy. It sounded scared, lonely, and maybe even sick or injured. Tommy looked up at the dark windows of the house. Most of them were black, with heavy curtains blocking any view inside. But on the second floor, one window showed a faint yellow glow, as if someone was awake with a lamp or candle burning. Was that Mr. Blackwood? Was he in there ignoring the sounds of the distressed animal below? The horse called out again, and this time the sound seemed even more desperate. Tommy felt tears sting his eyes. He had always been soft-hearted when it came to animals. Back on the farm, he was the one who noticed when the chickens looked sick, or when Buttercup seemed sad. His father used to tease him gently about it, saying Tommy had a special connection with animals. "They trust you," his father had said once, watching Tommy calm a nervous calf. "Animals can sense when someone has a kind heart. That's a gift, son. Not everyone has it." Now that gift felt like a burden. Tommy could hear the horse's distress, could almost feel its fear and confusion. But what could a 12-year-old boy do? He had no money, no power, no way to help. He was just a hungry kid in old clothes, standing outside the house of one of the most powerful men in town. Tommy looked around the dark street. There was no one else around, no adults who might know what to do. The other houses were far away, their windows glowing warmly but offering no help. He was completely alone with this terrible knowledge that somewhere behind those stone walls, an animal was suffering. The practical part of his mind told him to walk away. He had enough problems of his own. His mother was sick. His family was hungry, and getting involved with Mr. Blackwood's business could only lead to trouble. Rich, powerful men didn't like poor children asking questions or poking around their property. But every time the horse cried out, Tommy felt like it was calling directly to him. Like somehow in this big, unfair world, he was the only one who could hear its plea for help. The feeling was so strong it made his chest ache. Tommy stood there in the cold darkness, torn between fear and compassion, not knowing that his next decision would change everything for both him and the trapped animal crying out in the night. Tommy stood outside the iron fence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The horse's cries were getting weaker, more desperate, and each sound pulled at his heart like a rope. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore. He had to know what was happening to that poor animal. Moving as quietly as he could, Tommy crept around the side of the property. The iron fence continued all the way around the house, but in the back corner, where the shadows were deepest, he found what he was looking for. Some of the decorative iron bars had bent outward slightly, creating a gap just big enough for a skinny 12-year-old to squeeze through. Tommy looked around one more time to make sure no one was watching, then carefully pushed through the gap. His jacket caught on one of the iron points, tearing a small hole, but he managed to get through without making any noise. Now he was actually on Mr. Blackwood's property, and his heart was beating so fast he thought it might burst. The back of the house was even darker than the front. Tall trees blocked most of the moonlight, and Tommy had to feel his way along the stone wall. He could still hear the horse, and now he was certain the sounds were coming from below ground level. There had to be a basement or cellar of some kind. His eyes adjusted to the darkness. Tommy noticed a small window near the ground, barely visible behind some overgrown bushes. Faint light was coming from inside, and the horse sounds were definitely stronger here. He pushed aside the scratchy bushes, ignoring the thorns that caught at his clothes and skin. The window was old and dirty, with paint peeling around the edges. More importantly, it wasn't locked. Someone had left it slightly open, probably for air circulation. Tommy's heart raced as he realized he could actually get inside and see what was happening. But this was different from squeezing through a fence. This was actually breaking into someone's house. If he got caught, he could go to jail. A rich, powerful man like Mr. Blackwood could make serious trouble for a poor kid like Tommy. He might never see his mother again. The horse whinnied again, a sound so full of pain and fear that it made Tommy's decision for him. He couldn't walk away now. Carefully, he pushed the window open wider and squeezed his small body through the opening. The smell hit him immediately. It was the smell of a stable, but wrong somehow. Instead of the clean smell of fresh hay and well-cared-for animals, This smelled dirty and neglected. There was the odor of old manure that hadn't been cleaned up, stale water and something else. The smell of sickness and fear. Tommy dropped quietly to the floor and looked around in shock. He was in what had obviously once been a regular basement with stone walls and a concrete floor. But someone had turned it into a makeshift stable. There were rough wooden boards nailed up to create a stall, and piles of moldy hay thrown around carelessly. And there, in the poorly made stall, was the most beautiful horse Tommy had ever seen. It was a black stallion with a coat that should have been shiny but was now dull and dirty. Even in the dim light from a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, Tommy could see that this was a magnificent animal. But the horse looked terrible. Its ribs were showing through its coat, meaning it hadn't been fed properly in weeks. Its mane was tangled and dirty, and there were cuts and scrapes on its legs from trying to move around in the too small space. The worst part was the horse's eyes. They looked scared and confused, like the animal couldn't understand why it was being kept in such a horrible place. When the horse saw Tommy, it backed away nervously, pressing itself against the far wall of the makeshift stall. "Easy, boy," Tommy whispered, using the same gentle voice he had always used with Buttercup. "I'm not going to hurt you." The horse's ears perked up at the kind tone, but it stayed pressed against the wall. Tommy could see that someone had tied the animal with a rope that was too short, preventing it from lying down properly. The water bucket was nearly empty and looked like it hadn't been cleaned in days. The food bucket was completely empty. As Tommy looked around the basement prison, he began to understand what was happening. This beautiful horse was being hidden here, kept in terrible conditions for some reason. But why? And how did he know this horse? Suddenly, Tommy's memory clicked into place. He had seen this horse before about 2 months ago, when he and his mother had gone to town for supplies. An old woman named Mrs. Patterson had been riding this exact horse down Main Street. Tommy remembered because the horse was so beautiful, and because Mrs. Patterson had looked so happy and proud sitting on its back. Mrs. Patterson was a widow who had lost her husband the year before. Tommy's mother had told him that she was having money troubles just like a lot of families in town, but she had always kept her horse, a gift from her late husband on their wedding day 20 years ago. That horse meant everything to her. Tommy remembered hearing his mother and some other women talking about Mrs. Patterson a few weeks later. They had said something about her having to sell her horse to pay her debts. She had been crying in the general store, they said, because losing that horse was like losing her husband all over again. But if Mrs. Patterson had sold the horse, why was it here in Mr. Blackwood's basement, hidden away like some kind of secret? A horrible thought began to form in Tommy's mind. What if Mr. Blackwood hadn't bought the horse fairly? What if he had taken it as payment for debt and then told Mrs. Patterson it had died or been stolen? That way, he could sell the valuable animal and keep all the money for himself. The more Tommy thought about it, the more sense it made. Mr. Blackwood was known for being cruel to people who owed him money. Maybe he had forced Mrs. Patterson to give up her beloved horse, then hidden it away until he could find a buyer who wouldn't ask uncomfortable questions. Tommy felt sick to his stomach, and not just from hunger. This beautiful animal was being treated terribly, and somewhere in town, an old woman was mourning the loss of her last connection to her dead husband, all so that a rich man could make even more money. The horse whinnied softly as if sensing Tommy's anger and sadness. This time, Tommy didn't back away. He slowly approached the stall, keeping his movements calm and gentle. "I know who you are," he whispered to the horse. "You belong to Mrs. Patterson, don't you? She must miss you so much." The horse seemed to recognize the kindness in Tommy's voice. It stopped pressing against the wall and took a tentative step forward. Tommy could see the hope in its dark eyes, as if the animal sensed that finally, someone who cared had found it. But even as Tommy felt a connection forming with the beautiful horse, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Footsteps were moving around upstairs and voices were talking. One of them was definitely Mr. Blackwood's deep, harsh voice, and from what Tommy could hear, they were talking about this very horse. Tommy pressed himself against the wall and listened carefully. He couldn't make out all the words, but he heard enough to confirm his worst fears. Mr. Blackwood was planning to sell the horse soon, probably to someone who wouldn't care where it came from or how it had been treated. Tommy was trapped in the basement with stolen horse, and the man who had stolen it was walking around right above his head. If Mr. Blackwood came downstairs and found him, Tommy didn't want to think about what might happen. The horse seemed to sense the danger too. It stood very still, as if it understood that both their lives might depend on staying quiet. In the dim light of the basement prison, a scared boy and a stolen horse looked at each other and somehow understood that their fates were now connected. Tommy had come looking for food to feed his hungry family. Instead, he had stumbled upon a secret that could destroy a powerful man, if he could figure out what to do with it before that same man destroyed him. Tommy crouched in the shadows of the basement, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone in the house could hear it. The voices upstairs continued talking, and now he could make out more of what they were saying. Mr. Blackwood was definitely discussing plans for the horse, and none of what Tommy heard sounded good. "The buyer will be here tomorrow night." Mr. Blackwood's voice drifted down through the floorboards. "He doesn't ask questions and he pays in cash. Once that animal is gone, there won't be any evidence left." Another voice, one Tommy didn't recognize, responded with something he couldn't quite hear. But Mr. Blackwood's reply was crystal clear. "The old woman thinks the horse died of some sickness. She'll never know what really happened. By next week, this whole business will be forgotten." Tommy felt anger burning in his chest like a fire. Mrs. Patterson thought her beloved horse was dead. She was probably mourning right now, maybe even blaming herself for not taking better care of the animal. Meanwhile, her horse was suffering, in this terrible basement prison, waiting to be sold to someone who might treat it even worse. But as angry as Tommy felt, he was also terrified. He was trapped in the basement of one of the most powerful men in town, listening to evidence of a serious crime. If Mr. Blackwood found him here, Tommy could disappear just like this horse had. Rich men like Blackwood had ways of making problems go away, especially problems caused by poor kids that nobody important would miss. Tommy looked at the horse, which was watching him with those intelligent, hopeful eyes. The animal seemed to sense that Tommy was different from the people who had been keeping it prisoner. There was trust beginning to form between them, the kind of connection Tommy had always had with animals. Near the horse's stall, Tommy noticed something that made his empty stomach clench with hunger. There was a bag of oats that had been left behind, probably meant for the horse but forgotten or ignored. The bag was half full, and Tommy's starving body reminded him that oats could be cooked into a filling meal. There was also a chunk of dried bread that looked like it had been tossed aside. For a moment, Tommy's mind filled with thoughts of taking that food. His mother was at home getting weaker every day because they had nothing to eat. She needed medicine they couldn't afford, and food that didn't exist. If Tommy took these supplies, he could feed his family for several days. Maybe it would give him enough time to find real work or figure out another solution. The horse wouldn't mind sharing, Tommy told himself. Animals were generous that way. And this food was just sitting here, forgotten and wasted. Mr. Blackwood certainly didn't need it. He probably threw away more food every day than Tommy's family saw in a week. But even as Tommy reached toward the bag of oats, another thought stopped him cold. This horse was hungry too, maybe hungrier than Tommy was, since it had been trapped here for weeks with no one to properly care for it. The animal was already thin and weak. Taking its food would just make its suffering worse. Tommy pulled his hand back and looked at the horse's gentle face. He thought about Mrs. Patterson, probably crying herself to sleep every night because she thought her beloved companion was dead. He thought about the buyer who was coming tomorrow night, someone who didn't ask questions and would probably treat the horse even worse than Mr. Blackwood had. The voices upstairs moved further away, but Tommy could still hear occasional words. They were making plans, talking about money, discussing how to get rid of any remaining evidence. It was clear that Mr. Blackwood had done this kind of thing before, and that he felt completely safe from any consequences. Tommy realized he was facing the biggest decision of his young life. He could take the food and sneak away, feeding his family but leaving the horse to its terrible fate. Or he could try to help the horse, risking his own safety and giving up the chance to ease his family's hunger. If he tried to help the horse and got caught, what would happen to his mother? She was depending on him to take care of her while his father was away. If Tommy disappeared or got arrested, she would be completely alone. She might not survive without someone to look after her, but if he walked away and left the horse here, Tommy knew he would never forgive himself. Every time he heard a horse whinny or saw Mrs. Patterson in town, he would remember this moment. He would remember choosing his own survival over doing what was right. Tommy thought about his father, somewhere in the big city trying to find work. His father had always taught him to stand up for those who couldn't protect themselves. A real man helps others even when it's hard, his father had said. Especially when it's hard. What would his father do in this situation? Tommy was pretty sure he knew the answer, and it wasn't to steal food and run away. The horse took a step closer to Tommy, stretching its neck toward him as if asking for help. In that moment, Tommy felt the weight of responsibility settling on his 12-year-old shoulders like a heavy coat. This animal was depending on him. Mrs. Patterson was unknowingly depending on him. Even the other people in town who might lose their belongings to Mr. Blackwood's schemes were depending on him. Tommy looked around the basement prison one more time. There had to be a way to help the horse without getting them both killed. The window he had come through was still open, providing an escape route, but the horse was too big to fit through that window, and Tommy was too small to break down the makeshift stall. He needed help from adults, people with real power who could stand up to Mr. Blackwood. But who would believe a hungry 12-year-old boy making accusations against one of the richest men in town? And even if someone believed him, would they be willing to risk their own safety to help a stolen horse? The footsteps upstairs seemed to be moving closer again. Tommy knew he was running out of time to make his decision. Stay and try to help, risking everything for a horse and an old woman he barely knew? Or take what food he could carry and run, back to his sick mother, keeping his family alive but living with the knowledge of what he had left behind. Tommy closed his eyes and tried to find the courage his father had always said was inside him. When he opened them again, the horse was still watching him with those trusting, hopeful eyes. In that moment, Tommy knew that some choices were bigger than fear, bigger than hunger, even bigger than his own survival. He had found something in this basement that was worth more than food or safety. He had found a chance to do something truly right in a world that had shown him mostly wrong. Whether he succeeded or failed, he couldn't walk away from that chance. Tommy reached out and gently touched the horse's soft nose, making a silent promise that somehow he would find a way to set them both free. Tommy spent several precious minutes calming the horse and studying the basement layout. The voices upstairs had moved away, but he knew they could return at any moment. He had to act fast, but he also had to be smart about it. The makeshift stall was built with rough wooden boards that had been nailed together quickly and carelessly. Tommy noticed that some of the nails were loose, probably from the horse pushing against the walls trying to get comfortable. Using a piece of old metal he found on the floor, Tommy carefully worked at the loose boards until he created an opening big enough for the horse to walk through. "Come on, boy," Tommy whispered, gently coaxing the magnificent animal out of its prison. The horse was nervous at first, but Tommy's calm voice and gentle touch helped it trust him. Years of working with animals on his family's farm had taught Tommy how to move slowly and speak softly, letting the horse know he was a friend. Once the horse was free from the stall, Tommy faced his next challenge, getting the animal out of the basement. There was a door at the far end of the basement that probably led outside, but it was locked. Tommy searched around until he found a key hanging on a nail behind some old equipment. His hands shook as he tried the key in the lock, and he nearly cried with relief when it turned. The door opened onto a small yard behind the house, hidden from the street by tall hedges. Tommy carefully led the horse outside, constantly listening for any sounds from the house. The cool night air seemed to revive the animal, and Tommy could see some of its natural spirit returning. But now came the hardest part of Tommy's plan. He couldn't just steal the horse and keep it for himself. That would make him no better than Mr. Blackwood. And he couldn't take the horse back to Mrs. Patterson without proof of what had happened, because Mr. Blackwood would just claim Tommy was the thief. Tommy needed help from someone with authority, someone who could investigate Mr. Blackwood's crimes and make sure justice was done. The only person he could think of was Sheriff Rodriguez, who had always seemed like an honest man whenever Tommy saw him in town. Leading the horse through the dark streets was terrifying. Every shadow could hide someone who might recognize the valuable animal. Every sound made Tommy's heart race with fear that Mr. Blackwood had discovered their escape. But the horse seemed to understand that they were working together now, and it followed Tommy quietly through the empty neighborhoods. The sheriff's office was on Main Street, about a mile from Mr. Blackwood's house. Tommy had never been inside before, but he had walked past it many times. There was usually a light on all night because someone was always on duty in case of emergencies. When Tommy reached the building, he tied the horse to a post outside and took a deep breath. This was it. The moment when he would either save Mrs. Patterson's horse or get himself and his family into more trouble than they could handle. The deputy on duty was a young man Tommy didn't recognize. He looked up in surprise when a skinny, 12-year-old boy walked into the office in the middle of the night, covered in dirt and looking scared but determined. "Son, what are you doing out so late?" the deputy asked, not unkindly. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" Tommy's mouth felt dry as sand, but he forced himself to speak. "I need to report a crime," he said, trying to make his voice sound stronger than he felt. "Someone stole Mrs. Patterson's horse and I know where it is." The deputy raised his eyebrows. "Mrs. Patterson's horse? That animal died weeks ago. She told everyone about it." "No, sir," Tommy said, shaking his head. "It didn't die. It's been hidden in Mr. Blackwood's basement. I saw it with my own eyes and I brought it here as proof." The deputy's expression changed when Tommy mentioned Mr. Blackwood's name. Everyone in town knew about the man's reputation, but few people were brave enough to make accusations against him. The deputy looked at Tommy more carefully, as if trying to decide whether to believe such a serious claim from such a young source. "That's a pretty big accusation, son," the deputy said slowly. "Mr. Blackwood is an important man in this town. You better be absolutely sure about what you're saying." Tommy nodded firmly. "I'm sure. The horse is tied up outside right now. You can see for yourself that it's alive and Mrs. Patterson can identify it. But there's more. Mr. Blackwood is planning to sell it tomorrow night to someone who won't ask questions about where it came from." The deputy stood up and walked to the window. When he saw the beautiful black horse standing under the street lamp, his expression changed completely. He recognized the animal immediately. Everyone in town had admired Mrs. Patterson's prize horse before its supposed death. "Wait here," the deputy told Tommy. He disappeared into a back room and returned a few minutes later with Sheriff Rodriguez himself. The sheriff was a tall, serious man with kind eyes and graying hair. He listened carefully as Tommy told his story again, asking questions about details and timing. "Son, do you understand how dangerous it was for you to go into that house?" the sheriff asked when Tommy finished. "Mr. Blackwood isn't the kind of man who forgives people who cross him." Tommy nodded. "I know, sir. But I couldn't just leave the horse there to suffer, and Mrs. Patterson thinks her horse is dead. That's not right." Sheriff Rodriguez studied Tommy's face for a long moment, then made his decision. "Deputy Miller, wake up Judge Harrison and get a search warrant for the Blackwood property. Tell him it's urgent, and send someone to bring Mrs. Patterson here so she can identify her horse." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Patterson arrived at the sheriff's office still in her nightgown and coat, tears streaming down her face when she saw her beloved horse alive and well. She hugged the animal's neck and cried, with joy, thanking Tommy over and over for bringing her companion back to her. Meanwhile, Sheriff Rodriguez and his deputies searched Mr. Blackwood's house with the warrant. They found the basement prison Tommy had described, complete with evidence of the horse's captivity. More importantly, they found documents that proved Mr. Blackwood had been running a scheme to steal valuable property from people who owed him money, then sell it while claiming the items had been lost or destroyed. When Mr. Blackwood was arrested, he tried to claim that Tommy had stolen the horse and planted evidence, but too many pieces fit together perfectly, and other victims began coming forward with similar stories. The rich man's house of lies came crashing down all at once. Mrs. Patterson was so grateful to Tommy that she insisted on rewarding him. She gave him $50, more money than Tommy's family had seen in months. But more importantly, She helped Tommy find a part-time job at the local stable, where his natural way with animals would be appreciated and paid for. With steady work and the reward money, Tommy was able to buy medicine for his mother and food for their table. When a letter finally arrived from his father saying he had found work and would be sending money home soon, Tommy felt like his family might actually survive their difficult times. But the best part of the whole experience was what happened 3 weeks later. Tommy was working at the stable when Mrs. Patterson rode up on her black horse, both of them looking healthy and happy. She dismounted and walked over to Tommy with a serious expression. "That horse has a name," she told him. "His name is Thunder, and he's been asking about you." Tommy looked confused. "Asking about me?" Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Animals remember kindness, Tommy. Thunder knows you saved his life, and he wants to make sure you know how grateful he is. Would you like to ride him?" Tommy had never ridden such a magnificent horse before. As Thunder carried him gently around the paddock, Tommy felt like he was flying. The horse that had once been trapped and suffering was now free and strong, just like Tommy felt free from the fear and hunger that had controlled his life for so long. Later that evening, Tommy walked home to the small house where his mother was waiting with dinner on the table, real food bought with money he had earned through honest work. As he told her about his day, Tommy realized that the night he heard a horse's cry for help had changed everything. He had learned that doing the right thing, even when it was scary and dangerous, could lead to amazing results. He had discovered that sometimes the weakest people had the power to help each other in ways that the strongest never could. And most importantly, he had found out that kindness, whether given to animals or people, always found a way to come back to those who shared it. Outside, the stars shone brightly in the clear sky, and somewhere across town Thunder stood in a clean, comfortable stall, well-fed and loved. Both the boy and the horse slept peacefully that night, knowing that they had found their way from darkness into light together.